What is good, everybody? Welcome back to another episode brought to you by the League FFB. Today, we're going through and updating our redraft wide receiver rankings. I have my top 50 mapped out for you guys. We're going to put them with rankings and tiers. I do want to preface at the beginning of this video, focus a little bit more on the tiers that these players are in, because if you want to arrange these guys in a specific order, as long as they're in the same tiers, I have no issues with it. But I just wanted to preface that at the beginning of the video. That said, we are going to be hopping into the top 50, so let's not waste any more time. Let's start talking about these wide receivers. All right, so as you can see, I have 9 tiers here today to kind of get through all of the top 50 wide receivers in my rankings. I have them broken up, so as you can see, each tier is labeled with kind of how I'm viewing these players for your teams. If you're drafting those guys at the top of it, I view them as an elite wide receiver 1, and then obviously it works its way all the way down until you get to just a solid flex play in the top 50. So that is kind of what we're going to be looking at here today. And starting in my tier 1, this is kind of how I'm viewing those elite wide receiver ones. So I have Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, CeeDee Lamb, and Amon-Ra St. Brown in this tier. We don't have to talk too in-depth about these guys. I know it's probably a little bit hard to see, but there is a little injury symbol for both Justin Jefferson and Amon-Ra St. Brown, so I will talk about that for these guys. I have moved CeeDee Lamb over Justin Jefferson in my rankings since my last update that I did, just because of a hamstring injury that Justin Jefferson has suffered. So it doesn't sound like it's going to keep him out of regular season football. It sounds like the plan is for him to be ready for week 1. Sounds like he could be returning to practice here in the next week or so, but just that little, preseason hamstring injury was enough for me to move Lamb over Jefferson in my ranks. And then Amon-Ra St. Brown, he has that little symbol because he had an off-season knee scope. He is healthy. He has been practicing, so I don't think it's going to really affect him at all, but that's just something that he's recovering from the off-season. And this is kind of how my elite wide receiver ones are. There, like I said, there's really not a lot to talk about with these guys because all of these guys can produce top numbers for your fantasy football teams. Now, moving on to my tier 2, as you can see, that is the high-end wide receiver 1 tier. I have moved Malik Nabers over Puka Nacua in my rankings, and that is mainly because of a Stafford back injury that is very ambiguous at this point. It does feel like there's a lot of uncertainty around Stafford, more than I would like. So I am moving Nabers over Nacua, even though Nabers has still dealt with, a little bit of a toe and a shoulder injury in the preseason so far. Should be ready for week 1. Obviously something to monitor, but I think the Stafford injury is way more serious than the Nabers injuries are, so I just have moved them in my rankings. Now, I did debate between Nico and Puka, maybe putting Nico over Puka, but Nico has dealt with his own injuries in the past as well, so I am going to keep it as is. Just know that Matthew Stafford injury is something that I am monitoring, and it is something that I do think is fairly serious, so you can see that little, emergency logo there in the top right of that page. So that's kind of what I'm looking at with this tier. All of these players, though, if they're healthy, if their teams are healthy, all of these things considered, they're going to be those high-end wide receiver ones. Now, looking down into the next tier, that is my solid wide receiver ones for fantasy. I do have it Drake London, Brian Thomas Jr., AJ Brown, T. Higgins, and Lad McConkey in this tier. The only thing here is, nobody's had any injuries, nobody's had any bad things happen, to other players in their team that's going to affect the situation. This tier has been fairly clean so far through the preseason, so I do want to keep that, recurring over the next couple of weeks. The only thing that I would be monitoring is AJ Brown did have a hamstring strain just a couple days ago. He did miss a practice or two. It's very new, not a lot of information on it. It's something I'm watching. Still have him as a very valuable piece for us in fantasy. I do think the Eagles are going to pass a little bit more this year, but he's somebody that I'm definitely watching. As far as the other guys go, should be target leaders for their offenses and or going to be in very high passing volume offense. That's more for T. Higgins, and I do believe Brian Thomas Jr. as well. But London is a smash pick this year for me. T. Higgins, I love the pick. AJ Brown, love the pick. All of these players are going to be very, very solid wide receiver ones for fantasy. Down to my tier 4, this is the fringe wide receiver ones. So yes, I know we're about 15 wide receivers in, but these guys are going to be a fringe wide receiver one most weeks for your fantasy football team, at least based off of my projections. It's a little bit of a smaller tier, and ironically, it's all Ohio State wide receivers. You have Garrett Wilson, JSN, and Marvin Harrison Jr. Definitely projecting a year 2 breakout for Marvin Harrison. I do think Garrett Wilson is still going to be a safe wide receiver, despite what some people believe about Justin Fields. And JSN, he's been a riser in my rankings, one of the bigger risers in my rankings since my last update. And that's just because I think that the target volume is going to be massive for JSN. They obviously let go of Noah Fant. It's Cooper Kupp there, but I don't think he has a ton left in the tank. And I do think that the tier that JSN was in before included guys like Davante Adams, included guys like Terry McLaurin, some other players as well that I think that tier is kind of falling apart a little bit at this moment in time. So these players definitely have separated themselves as safer options, at least for now at this moment in time. So that's kind of my fringe wide receiver ones. Going on to tier 5, we are going to be looking at those solid wide receiver 2s, very safe wide receiver 2s, I think, for fantasy football. Can they have flash wide receiver 1 week, spike weeks? Absolutely. I think that's kind of the tier that we're in here. Tyreek Hill's been a little bit of a faller. I don't love a lot of the off the field stuff that has been happening, late to practices, talking in, interviews and things like that, where Mike McDaniel and people are getting a little bit annoyed with Tyreek. Don't love that. Also, you account for the fact that last year was kind of a fall off, a little bit due to quarterback play, a lot of it probably due to quarterback play, but he's a player that I'm kind of avoiding in drafts this year. I just think if I was going to make a selection around where he's going in ADP, I'd probably just take the guys that are in the tier above him, or maybe just wait around and still get a guy in the same tier as him. For me, like Courtland Sutton or DJ Moore. So he's a player I don't really love at the moment in time. Other players in this tier that I think are worth talking about, you can see the little exclamation points or the warning signs next to Terry McLaurin and Davante Adams. Obviously, the Adams one is very similar to the Puka thing. The Stafford back injury, something worth monitoring. It does sound fairly serious, and it sounds like something that could be re-aggravated throughout the year. So these Rams wide receivers are very, very risky right now for me in drafts. And then Terry McLaurin, he's, holding out for a contract at this moment in time. So is he going to get the contract by week 1? I think so, but obviously he doesn't have it right now. He's not practicing. He's on the pup. So that is somebody that I definitely think we need to kind of keep an eye on. I think it's going to get smoothed out by the time week 1 rolls around, but you never know. So he's a player right now that I am watching closely. Courtland Sutton, DJ Moore, I think they're going to be center points for their offenses, and same with Mike Evans there. So let's move on to my tier 6. This is the upside wide receiver 2s, and it's by far the largest tier in my rankings. I think any of these guys can outproduce any of the guys in the tier at this point in time. They're all, very appealing options. In fact, I would be trying to target at least 1 or 2 wide receivers in this tier on all of my teams, because I think the upside with all of these guys is very massive. Devonta Smith comes in at 22, followed by Zay Flowers, DK Metcalf, Xavier Worthy, Jameson Williams, George Pickens, Tet McMillan, Rome Odunze, and Jalen Waddle. Really, the biggest riser in this tier for me is Zay Flowers, and I think that's really because he's in an offense that, I kind of punished him a little bit in my last rankings. I think the offense is going to be very good. I don't think Zay Flowers is a difference maker or a game breaker for fantasy football, and maybe I punished him a little bit in those rankings, like I said, because of that. At the end of the day, he's a very safe wide receiver 2 type of option. I think he has some upside based off of the offense he's in, and so I pulled him up my rankings a little bit in this one. I think it was like 6 or 7 spots. I had him, around where Pickens and McMillan were before, moved him a little bit up towards the top of the tier. Didn't want to punish him for, being in a good offense and maybe not being an elite game breaker type of guy, but he's very, very solid. Devonta Smith, love him. DK Metcalf is a player in this tier that does make me the most nervous of all of these players. I don't love the offense in Pittsburgh. Arthur Smith really hasn't produced top 24 wide receiver options outside of a 2020 AJ Brown. So is DK Metcalf going to be his first top 24 wide receiver since then? Maybe. I think it's in a range of outcomes. Aaron Rodgers, I don't think has a lot left in the tank, so he makes me the most nervous, but it's hard to really look at this offense and say anybody else is worthy of touches outside of DK, outside of maybe the running backs. But Xavier Worthy should have a good start to the season with Rice potentially being suspended. Jameson Williams, good offense, good big playability. Same with George Pickens. Ted McMillan and Rome Odunze are the huge breakout candidates for me in this tier. Love both of these players at their current cost, their ADPs. Rome is even going a little bit later than Ted McMillan, but I think that both of these players have the ability to be boom players in this tier. So I want to try and get one of those guys on my teams, especially if I can grab them as like my wide receiver 3 or a wide receiver 4. Jalen Waddle, you're fading Tyreek a little bit this year. At least that's what I'm doing. Waddle has had a good training camp. They've talked a lot about him this offseason. I think he's somebody to monitor and somebody who definitely deserves to be in this tier as well. And he could also have a little bit of a bounce back. We've seen him be a top 24 type of option before. We've even seen him be a top 12 type of option before, but it always depends on Tua Tagovailoa and his health. Now moving on to my tier 7 and looking at those wide receiver 3s, the guys who are rounding out the top 36, I do have Travis Hunter, Chris Olave, Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy, Stephon Diggs, and Jacoby Myers in this tier. 2 players specifically that I do want to talk about is going to be Travis Hunter. He's a riser for me in my rankings, also moved up about 7 spots. A lot of that is because of coach speak from Liam Cohen. They've talked about wanting to use him about 80% on offense. That has always been the concern for me, is how is the two-way play of Travis Hunter going to affect him for fantasy football? He's rising up my rankings a little bit, obviously not as confident confident as I am in a guy like Ted McMillan, but I still believe he's a solid wide receiver 3 for fantasy right away for fantasy football teams, and he's definitely somebody that has a lot of upside in this tier as well. I think probably the best offense in this tier included. So he's somebody that you should be targeting in that tier if you wanted to grab one of these guys. I think Olave, Ridley, Judy, all of those players are probably players who are number 1 wide receivers on their team. We just don't know how good these offenses are going to be. Quarterback concerns in New Orleans and Cleveland. Obviously, Cam Ward is the guy in Tennessee, but is he going to be a big producer year 1? I don't know. These guys are kind of just bad offenses, but clear number 1s in their offenses, so they're worth looking at. Stephon Diggs is a player that has been rising up my rankings, and the big reason why he's risen is because he avoided the pup. Obviously, he had a 2024 ACL tear. He is healthy. He's been practicing. They're saying he's looking really good. Being Drake May's number 1 wide receiver, that does make me very excited. So he's moved up my rankings quite a bit since our last update. I think about 10, 12 slots for Stephon Diggs. So he's a player I'm very comfortable taking, especially like I said, as my wide receiver 3 on my team, because I think he could be a target monster for the Patriots, and here for Drake May as the number 1. Now moving into my tier 8, this is going to be those flex plays with upside, or at least we're just drafting them as flex plays right away. I think all of them obviously have the chance to outproduce their ADPs. I like this tier a lot. This is also a tier that I would try and target to grab one of these guys at least on my rosters, but Rashee Rice is down here, Ricky Pearsall, Jaden Reed, Khalil Shakir, Josh Downs, and Emeka Egbuka are all down here. Lots of very intriguing options. I think there's quite a few that we can talk about. Rashee Rice is obviously down here, recovering from that 2024 LCL injury. He now has a new groin injury, and there's a suspension looming. I'm kind of projecting that suspension to be about 4 games. It could be anywhere from 4 to 6 in my opinion. So he is down here because he's going to be missing those games. Obviously, we're not going to be drafting him ahead of guys that I do have above them, but when he's on the football field, he's probably going to be producing at a similar level to guys like Mike Evans, Marvin Harrison Jr., JSN. At least that's what I would be projecting, but he's going to miss some time, and so I can't really confidently draft him in those drafts ahead of options that I know will be there for, or at least I'm projecting to be there for 17 games. Ricky Pearsall is a player too who has that injury designation. Really, that was just because he had a summer hamstring strain, but since then he's been healthy. He's a big riser in my rankings, and a lot of that is because Ayuk went onto the pup. Obviously, Juwan Jennings is dealing with an injury as well. So Ricky Pearsall, the only healthy guy in that wide receiver room right now. Obviously, George Kittle is going to be a big part of the offense, but Pearsall is rising for me, and I did like him last year as a rookie, former first-round pick here. Jaden Reed, Khalil Shakir, both of those players are going to be kind of boom-bust options in very elite offenses. I like Reed a lot. I think he can take a step forward this year. It's going to depend on how often he's on the football field. It's never been a talent issue for Reed. It's always been an opportunity issue, which I just don't really understand it, but it's something that's just been going on for the last couple of seasons. Shakir's down a little bit in my rankings, moved down about 3 or 4 spots. That's because he has a high ankle sprain that he's been dealing with. They say he's questionable for week 1, should hopefully be good to go, but obviously that high ankle sprain is not what you want to see in the preseason. Downs and Egbuka, very high upside guys. Egbuka, big riser for me, was big on him during the rookie draft process for Dynasty. It's translated almost instantly, so he's moving up my redraft rankings right now. Godwin on the pup, very, very good camp reports for Egbuka, so he's moving up my rankings quickly, and he honestly probably needs to move up even more. Right now, he's up 12 spots from my last ranking and still trending up. Downs, bad offense. We don't know what the quarterback play is going to look like, but he's always been a producer, so good flex with upside for me in my rankings. And now moving on to my tier 9, my last tier to round out the top 50. These are just solid flex plays. There's going to be some question marks for some of these guys. We'll talk about them. Deebo Samuel, Juwan Jennings, Matthew Golden, Chris Godwin, Jordan Addison, Keenan Allen, Darnell Mooney, and Cooper Kupp are the guys that kind of make up this tier here. Juwan Jennings, I just talked about it. Dealing with a calf strain, suffered a setback. There is no timeline for the return. He's wanting a new contract too. Tough to really trust, what we saw out of him last year, and then all of the bad stuff that has happened so far this preseason. I think it's more so pointing towards a Ricky Pearsall breakout, and that's why he's in the tier above, but you can still draft Juwan Jennings. Just keep an eye on that injury and see what that timeline really does end up being. Matthew Golden is a first-round wide receiver for the Green Bay Packers. Think he has some breakout potential. Maybe we'll start a little bit slow. The Packers haven't, naturally given rookies a ton of work to start, but he has gotten some good reports in training camp, so he's somebody I'm watching. Godwin is obviously down here, 2024 ankle fracture and dislocation, now on the pup. When he's on the football field, he's going to be fine, but I can't draft him comfortably at this point in time, so he comes in for me as my wide receiver 46. Jordan Addison in a similar range, 3-game suspension for the DUI that he had last spring. That's a player that, because he's going to miss the 3 games, you're moving him down the rankings. Obviously, when he is on the football field, I think he's probably going to produce similar to guys in that Jalen Waddle, Rome Odunze, George Pickens type of range, just because that's kind of what he's naturally done as he's been healthy for the Minnesota Vikings. Keenan Allen, the newest signing for the Los Angeles Chargers, finds his way for me into the 48 slot. I think he's very interesting as a flex play. It'll be interesting to see how much juice he has left in the tank. Obviously, he's got rapport with Justin Herbert, but this offense isn't going to pass the football around a lot. I do think McConkey is the number one clearly, but Keenan Allen can still be involved. We'll see what that looks like long term. Darnell Mooney has the injury designation there for me. That's because he's dealing with the shoulder injury. He's missing some time in camp, but he should be ready for week 1 is what I'm hearing. So he's somebody who's very interesting in an offense that I do think takes a step forward this year. And Cooper Kupp, my last guy, don't know how much he has left in the tank either. Obviously, the Rams felt like they could move on from him and still be fine. So, we'll see what that means. I don't love Darnold as much as I like Stafford for Kupp because of the rapport that Kupp had with Stafford. So we'll see what happens. For me, a solid flex play right now, but I'm not trusting him super confidently in my fantasy football leagues, but he does just crack the top 50 for me. But there you have it, guys. I know we kind of went through very quick. Like I said, this is an updated version to the video that we did earlier. In that video we did, just a couple weeks ago, we did talk in depth about, how these guys performed a little bit last year, what I'm projecting this year. This is more of an updated version as to where guys are moving, how guys are rising and falling down my rankings. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it. If you do, hit the like button. It is the best free way to show this channel some support. Also, make sure you guys are subscribed to this channel. You don't want to miss any of our future content. And last but not least, make sure to go join our free Discord. We do have a free Discord linked in the description, helping you guys with those fantasy football teams 24/7, 365, trying to help you win a fantasy football championship. But with all of that out of the way, nothing else for you guys today. See you on our next episode. Until then, peace out.